And
I'm excited to see who he ends up facing in the finals.
yeah, coming up, we have um, um, Paul Green versus Gabriel Bostic, another Bant Nadu versus Jeskai control match, and I believe we're just going to jump right over there right now.
Yeah, so we watched Gabriel make it past Nadu deck in the quarterfinals. That list a little less prepared for these more grindy matchups, more focused on speed. Paul Green's list, pretty similar to the list we saw Jason Yee top 8 the Pro Tour with, playing a bunch of Malevolent Rumbles and Arboreal Grazers. To go with 2 copies of Cryptic Woodlands rather than just the one, so the deck is better at getting Delirium and better at finding its Nadus, having resiliency for its Nadus to make sure it can fight a longer game better and present the combo turn over turn rather than just a couple of times over the course of a game. One thing I do want to draw a little bit of attention to about Paul's deck is notably he does not have his Sun Cleanser main deck. All these decks we've seen, they've had the ability to guard for Sun Cleanser game 1, be really strong against energy and also protecting against Wrath of the Skies. Paul's Sun Cleanser in his sideboard. So Wrath of the Skies exactly as backbreaking as Gabriel wants it to be in game 1.
Yeah, there's the second Sylvan Safekeeper, but that's not as relevant against the Rats here. And
yeah,
both players have slower hands. Paul Green's just surveilling on turn 1, setting up a turn 2.
Yeah. Two copies of Endurance also in Paul's deck. Another tool that lets him play a long game a little better has Answers to Flage, and that means that turning the corner is not going to be quite so easy for the Jeskai deck.
Yeah, and Paul's really thinking about what to do with the top card of his deck, and opts to leave it on top. I believe it's a Springheart Nantuko. And one upside of Malevolent Rumble is it gives you something to play on too that doesn't die to removal. And it's a way to spend your mana into face-up removal that just advances your position, develops your board, without actually committing anything. And it's a really useful tool against
definitely one of the cards that helps the deck line up better against Jeskai. Still would be softened to something like a Wrath of the Skies here, but anything shy of that. Just providing advantage on access that is pretty tough for Gabriel to keep up with.
Yeah, and Gabriel's surveilling, trying to see if they can find the Wrath of the Skies.
Yeah, I think in a spot like that, that's the main thing that matters. That, or at least a Teferi to check the Urza Saga, find some way of punishing the start.
And that is a Wrath of the Skies. They're doing it X=1, sandbagging an energy, destroying the land and the spawn.
Yeah, good old double Stone Rain, never hurt anyone. And yeah, this puts Gabriel in a spot where if Paul does not develop a Shuko this turn, then Gabriel's pretty safe to go for a 1 ring. That hypothetical, of course, didn't happen. But leaves them in a pretty good spot for the next few turns to, if they maybe answer a few threats, can get the 1 ring out and get that card advantage going sooner rather than later, because they do need to find some source of turn over turn card advantage to actually be able to close out the game against Nadu rather than just tread waters and give the Nadu deck infinite time to find more threats.
And you said if a Shuko doesn't get developed. Well, unfortunately, I have bad news for you. Paul Green is casting a Shuko right now. And Gabriel does have the Force of Negation, but they're really thinking about whether they want to commit it to actually answer the Shuko and spend 2 full cards on it.
Yeah, and I mean, again, Shuko, not the most powerful card, but this is the second time we've seen Gabriel do this, and I really, really like this play, recognizing the 1 ring just going to give you enough advantage that doesn't matter you're throwing away 2 cards to answer a 1-mana equipment. It's all about just getting that card advantage going, getting to a spot where you can take over the game, and that means making sure your opponent's not threatening combo next turn.
And just having this One Ring developed just lets them say, okay, I'm now pressuring you to just kill me and develop. If Paul Green has exactly Nadu or a Pact plus another Shuko here, then he can actually just combo off. But barring just a straight up combo this turn, Gabriel getting dressed down means that they're just safe to keep going.
Yeah, and notably, we've seen the one Shuko answered. We've seen the Urza Saga played out, which is something that's more likely to happen early if there's a desire to get a Shuko. So it's pretty likely that there was at most one other Shuko in Paul Green's hand at the time. And that, I think, is a reason to think a Shuko is fairly unlikely. Except that, yeah, maybe you do lose the game if it's that exact combination of 3 cards in Paul Green's hand. But if it's not, you really need to get the One Ring down at some point to actually get ahead rather than stay at parity. And so I really like the choice to play it out from Gabriel.
Yeah, and Paul plays out a Springheart and Shuko, I believe, just as a creature. And there is no Court of Calling, but just choosing to play it in case he draws one, which is very heads up.
Yeah, there's also that copy of Sylvan Safekeeper in hand. I think at this point, Gabriel has only 3 copies of Wrath of the Sky in their deck. You need to accept that if there is another Wrath of the Sky, you're probably not beating that, so not play around it. And then the Sylvan Safekeeper is going to protect the Springheart Nantuko by coming down, so there's not really a reason to bestow it because the Nantuko is protected from 1-for-1 interaction anyway. This way, at least lets Paul get in for a little more damage, and like you said, have the ability to do more things through God, with God.
The other thing about committing is that there is a Supreme Verdict that was pitched to the Force of Negation. So there's only 2 Wraths left in Gabriel's stack, which means that Paul is safer to just commit more to the board.
Yeah, I believe that, like you said, there's only the 4 Rats total in Gabriel's deck. So, yeah, it makes sense that you play around that less at this point, though. Again, it's the other thing is it's very much a matter of time and inevitability, where this One Ring is eventually going to find another board wipe. And so what you really need to do is threaten lethal before that happens, because if you don't, Gabriel's just going to eventually take over the game, and you really have a lot less time to develop those threats than you normally would in a matchup like this.
And Subtlety, Dress Down Galvanic Discharge, and 3 Fairy is such a flexible answer suite. Even though it doesn't have the Wrath that Gabriel needs, it's still a lot of different angles of attack.
Yeah, it's Gabriel's pretty much got all their bases covered, and that tends to happen when you're drawing a bunch of cards with the One Ring. But yeah, the second One Ring means the pressure's not really going to matter. Eventually, there'll be a way of dealing with Paul's entire board, but at this point, just like taking a few more damage, not the biggest deal, and yeah, just with Subtlety in particular, having anything Paul could do locked up means Gabriel is, I think, firmly in control here.
Yeah, and just passing, playing it safe, playing it slow, making sure Paul can't combo, and since you're not under that much pressure due to the second One Ring, this is just taking control of the game. Paul's just thinking about what he can even do here.
Yeah, I think Paul's one way of getting out from a spot like this is with something like Nadu plus God of Calling, like some way or the other of just developing multiple game-ending threats in a turn, and then Gabriel's only able to answer one of them is, I think, his best bet at winning this game. Notably, the Sylvan Safekeeper in hand will mean that there's at least some chance of going off even without a Shuko.
Yeah, where it can just sacrifice a land to get an auto trigger. And while that isn't the best rate, it's better than nothing.
Yeah, it's not enough to combo on its own, but will give Paul enough looks to kind of spin towards another Shuko.
And Paul's just not committing anything, trying to make sure that Gabriel can't spend their mana since Gabriel's up on cards.
Yeah, there's no real reason to play even more into a board wipe when this board alone is threatening lethal in a couple of turns. So it makes sense to not play out the Safekeeper, particularly against all the copies of Subtlety that we know are in Gabriel's deck. I believe there's a full 4 in Gabriel's deck, so just playing into those as little as possible makes a lot of sense, I think.
And this end step dress down, do you think it's being played to try and cycle, or do you think it's because Gabriel wants to deal with the Safekeeper? We know there isn't a Safekeeper.
There isn't a Safekeeper in play yet. I believe there's one in hand, though it's hard to tell from this angle. But yeah, I assume the dress down was played just a cantrip at this point because you want to find another Wrath of the Skies, and so drawing a bunch of cards towards it would be nice. Also, being able to maybe play out the One Ring and have answers up would be nice, and so Gabriel's trying to find the mana to be able to do that, and that means hitting land drops.
And yeah, we see Wrath of the Skies being played. This is what Gabriel needed. And
Oh, and the exciting thing about playing out Dress Down is after you wipe the board, this maybe gives Gabriel the opportunity to develop a Flage if they have a copy in hand, because Dress Down would prevent it from getting sacrificed if that was something they ended up drawing. Didn't draw a Flage, but that's yet
Dressing would be
another reason
destroyed.
to play it.
Dressing would be destroyed by Wrath of the Skies.
If they had drawn a Flage, they could have played it prior to Wrathing, and then destroyed everything with with CMC2 or less.
Right, that's how Magic works. I don't think it ultimately matters. Discarding to hand size. 3 subtleties?
Yeah, the main thing, the main issue Gabriel has here is lack of lands. I mean, we talked about cantripping to try and hit those land drops. You really want to be able to develop your second ring while leaving up counter magic. Like, I think the one way they lose this game is they don't have counter magic and a plus ring and are stuck in a spot where they either going to lose to their ring damage or to they're going to lose to their ring damage if they don't do anything, but they can't keep leaving up a ring. And are forced to tap down. It's pretty unlikely that happens with the multiple copies of Subtlety in hand, but yeah, land really the thing they need here, so it makes sense to play as aggressively as possible towards trying to put some lands into play.
Yeah, just making sure that they don't have a fail case, since with 3 subtleties in hand, Paul's not really going to be able to have the flexibility to combo and kill them that way.
Yeah, I think in Paul's spot, his outs involve stuff like cording for Nadu rather than hardcasting it because of the subtleties. But yeah, even that likely to be too slow given the lack of lands and creatures in play.
Yeah, and Gabriel's thinking about what to do in response to Nadu, seeing if they want to cast Counterspell or pitch cast a Subtlety.
Yeah. Post-board, again, spots like these get much better for the Nadu deck. When you have access to things like the ring, non-creature threats that threaten to take over the game. But yeah, game 1 Subtlety is kind of a one-size-fits-all answer to all the stuff Paul has going on.
And Gabriel starts by discharging the Safekeeper while the Nadu's on the stack.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Regardless of whether Gabriel has an answer to the Nadu, this is likely correct to do because it forces a land sacrifice out of Paul Green, and that's not something he would have done. That's something he might not have done if the Nadu had already been counted.
Yeah, and I really appreciate pitch casting Subtlety as well. Just putting more squeeze on the lands there.
Yeah. So we know Paul doesn't have a land in hand, or at least I believe we know he doesn't have a conventional land in hand, Dryad Arbor notwithstanding. Well, I believe he had an opportunity to play one out in the past and didn't. And so that means for Gabriel, you're pretty incentivized to kind of squeeze his mana, force a safekeeper sack. So yeah, I really like the line taken there.
I believe there is a hedge maze in Paul's hand right now, but it's still just pressuring the mana is a way that you can just turn your superior cards into answers.
Yeah, and still no sixth land. Oh, never mind. There it is.
Just need to draw the
So
6th card for turn to find it.
yeah, Shockland perhaps not the ideal land for a spot like this, just because Gabriel's life total is a little low, and they really need to find a Flage at this point. Just some way of making sure they can gain enough life to not die to this One Ring.
Yeah, and they're discharging the Safekeeper, and Paul sacrifices a land to keep her around even more.
Yeah, and at this point in Paul's spot, I wonder whether you think, okay, I'm not winning the old-fashioned way. I'm not. Gabriel has 6 spells in hand. I'm not really beating that. Maybe 7 spells. I don't know quite how many cards there are. So at that point, I might as well try and get in by like nickel and diming with these 2 creatures because that's the only way I'm really winning.
Yeah, and the pitch
We
cast
do
subtlety
see
on. Go ahead.
we do see a pile of counter magic in Gabriel's hand. We don't see anything like a Wrath of the Skies and 1-for-1 interaction not really cutting it here. So yeah, obviously creatures couldn't attack this turn because of the One Ring, but over the next couple of turns, I wouldn't be surprised to see those creatures attack a bunch, and that be Paul's one way of really winning this game.
Yeah, Paul's down to 1 card in hand with Nadu on top of the deck. And Gabriel's pile of counterspells just isn't enough to answer the board.
Yeah, so the question on this spot for Gabriel, I think, is whether or not they want to activate the One Ring. Whereas more One Ring activations do dig towards something like Flage, but also put Gabriel on a much faster clock, which is a problem. Whereas as it stands, Gabriel can maybe counter the Nadu or Subtlety it if it depending on where it gets cast, and then lean on a Subtlety as a 3/3 blocker to hold off the Safekeeper and Dryad Arbor, while they get a bunch more draws towards something like Flage or another ring.
And do you think it's correct to draw cards here? Or do you think it's correct to play it more slowly? Or do you think it just depends on what Paul does?
It's a little dependent on what Paul does, whether or not he attacks, but I think it's correct to not draw the card's main phase at least. I think affording to miss 1 more land drop's not the end of the world. And yeah, this way allows Gabriel flexibility. Like, given the way this is panned out, there's not really any reason to draw cards anymore. Where the One Ring is threatening to, where the Subtlety is going to block both the creatures. If this Nadu gets put on top, then the Dryad Arbor can be killed with a removal spell. And one way or another, that's going to result in Paul losing a land, so the Nadu can't be recast. And at that point, you have quite a while to find a copy of Flage.
Yeah, and Paul's just looking through the graveyard, making sure there isn't a Flage that can be escaped. And just thinking to see what are the ways that he actually gets out of this. Does he want this Nado on top of his deck to threaten it again, or does he want to try and find something else?
Yeah, it's a pretty tough spot where it's hard for. At the end of the day, a lot of Paul's outs to winning this game end with things not working out for Gabriel. So he needs to figure out whether just what sort of line he wants to take. But at the end of the day, there's not much more he can do at this point other than playing it safe, keep applying those points of pressure, and really hoping Gabriel does not draw anything off the One Ring that matters at all. And that the ring just kills them before they get a chance to stabilize.
Yeah, and Gabriel's just tanking, doing the math as to whether they can afford to tap the One Ring. Seeing if, does that let Paul swing with both his creatures to just get cheeky little exact damage?
Yeah, I think Gabriel using the One Ring that turn would have meant like things ending this turn cycle if they didn't find something. Okay, Teferi's
Just
huge. That bounces the One Ring.
yeah, and just be able to bounce the One Ring, recast it means you're not losing life anymore, and means that you don't take damage. Although it does give Paul a window to play out a Nadu.
Yeah, there's not enough pressure here that I'm really particularly worried about recasting the One Ring this turn in Gabriel's spot. I think they can just bounce the One Ring, pass the turn, hold up a bunch of counter magic, and they pretty much got the game locked down at this point.
You're right, with Counterspell and the coin flip Counterspell, they just have maneuverability.
Yeah. I'm almost interested to see whether we see Invert Polarity winning this game by making a copy of Nadu that will let Gabriel actually close out the game.
They'll be able to untap it with Minamo.
Yeah, get triggers.
And it looks like they do play the One Ring again. Just they have one subtlety left in hand, and I believe they're just leaning on that.
Yeah, I mean, either way, really, Gabriel's got this. Playing out the One Ring to make sure you don't lose to something you missed with some chip damage. But yeah, knowing that Paul's lost Paul can't have Nadu plus Shuko means it's like not really a risk of combo here. And so you can play it safe. I'm not sure whether there was another subtlety or not, whether one got pitched at some point to another. But even if there isn't, it's really, really hard for Paul to go off from the spot.
And Paul's just playing the Nadu, the forced play. And
yeah, there's a force of negation here too. So in Gabriel's hand, so even if there is a Shrieker found at some point off of like sacrificing a bunch of lands to Safekeeper, that's not going to cut it either.
and I believe that's Salty being pitch cast. We can't really see it from this angle, but I believe Gabriel just moved a card around. I know they were just moving the Salty. The Nadu resolved. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a force of negation in hand. The Nadu is not really an issue. Trying to go off at this point would mean sacrificing a bunch of lands, which seems really, really bad for Paul. And yeah, knowing that you have the force for Ashuko means things are pretty clearly locked up.
Yeah, the concern with Nadu is just that it's a 3/4 flyer that eats the Salty in combat. And there's the Flage. So Gabriel can go up to 5 life and not just die to the One Ring and Nadu attack.
I don't believe there's a copy of Arena of Glory in play. So it is probably just going to be Flage being hardcast. Not
Yeah, but
actually the best spot for Gabriel. It doesn't look like they have enough red mana to recast the Flage after casting it from hand. That might be a next turn thing.
yeah, they've got 2 red sources. So you get to hardcast Flage, they have to target Paul, or else he can sacrifice a land to deny the life gain and let One Ring be lethal.
The Flage very much does need to go face. Oh, okay. There's a red fetch, I believe, to get a basic mountain. So that does mean the Flage is going to be getting recast. That puts Gabriel in a much safer spot, given they have a force of negation in hand. So it should be protected from a Shuko. It's still not unwinnable. The game is still not unlosable for them. Notably, we could see we could see like double Shuko being drawn to get Paul out of this, but
They
yeah,
could also be. No,
unlikely
there's
to
the
come back.
subtlety. So there isn't an Outrider on core as an out. But Paul needs something this turn. And Grazer sure isn't it.
I think we're at the point where Paul needs to start floating mana and going for it. It's
I
not really much else for him to do.
Do you think he's supposed to play out Nantuko first, or just try and float mana, see what he draws?
I think float mana and see what he draws, but it's pretty close. The problem with Nantuko is like the main thing you're restricted on is number of things that cause Nadu triggers and not number of creatures to trigger Nadu onto. So yeah, the risk of playing out Nantuko is it makes playing out double Shuko even harder. Oh, though bestowing Nantuko on Dryad Arbor is
Oh,
really interesting because that means that some amount of copies can be made if there's enough mana, and those copies can give Paul more things to sacrifice to the Sylvan Safekeeper.
yeah, that's a very interesting line. And I don't think that Force of Negation works. I think it's still a creature on the stack. But I'm not sure.
One way or another, though, Nantuko getting countered means there's not much to be done. I think there's a subtlety in hand. And yeah, this game looks pretty over.
I am incorrect. It loses the creature type when it's on the stack. So the Force of Negation is absolutely able to hit that Nantuko.
Yeah, and in the spot, I think just trying to find a Shuko. The Force of Negation being gone means that Shuko is more likely to resolve. So Paul's still in this, but I think pretty unfavored. I believe he gets 2 more looks for Shuko. And it's probably game if he doesn't find them, with every land being an extra look. But even if he does find Shuko, once we get to a certain point, it's hard to actually combo.
Yeah, especially if all of your creatures already have Shroud.
Yeah, notably, Paul can reactivate. So what Paul can do is he can stack the triggers, such as activate Sylvan Safekeeper, targeting something like Nadu. The Nadu trigger happens, he lets that resolve, but before the Safekeeper ability resolves, he can target the Nadu again. So it's sort of like a way of dodging Shroud with that.
Yeah, it does let you get around it, but it means you have to do everything on the stack at the same time. And the Arbor is being sacrificed. That's another land. So that's
Yeah, things are looking pretty tough here. So hard to imagine Paul getting out of this. I don't know what his Lost God is.
I don't
Too
think
low
we
a life total to use something like a Hex Parasite. Not that I believe he has one anyway. He's a one man. Oh, I think I guess the line here for Paul could be something like float mana off a land, try and find another land. Yeah,
But the problem with that is he can't really use the fetches for lands because that's too costly for life.
yeah. I don't know how many basic Paul has left in his deck. I think he needs to use the fetches for mana, try and find another land. God for Outriders is the way he wins this.
And I
But
believe that gives him mana to cord for 2, but that's not enough.
yeah. Well, Grizza is more looks technically.
Grizz is more like singular, but
Yeah.
it gets subtletied, and
Yeah, I have to imagine
I
that's the
believe
game.
that's just it.
I suppose very technically, Paul isn't dead here. He can double chump block, but I don't like his chances. Oh,
No,
he
with
can subtlety regular and chump block with safekeep on the flage, but yeah, that's extremely unlikely to get there. Some may even say 0%, given no lands in play, a plethora of counterspells in Gabriel's hand.
yeah, and Gabriel's drawing with the One Ring, trying to just find some removal to just kill the boring way. And another Flage just lets both Lightning Helixes hit face for lethal to move us to game 2.
Yeah, pretty impressive showing by this Nadu deck. A lot more resiliency, a lot of ability to almost go off that through a pile of interaction. But at the end of the day, only Wrath of the Skies into One Ring, just really, really hard for the deck to beat, particularly game 1.
Yeah, and now we're going to move on to our sideboard games. And I believe Paul Green has a sideboard that's more of a hybrid between the sideboards we've seen from our previous Nadu versus Jeskai control matches.
Yeah, still has a lot of the good tools for the matchup. Notably, there is still the one Titania, still the two One Ring. So those are very much the most important things. No Veil of Summer, so a little less counter magic protection, but there's Spell Pierce, Swan Songs, stuff like that. I actually really like Swan Song in a spot like this. Oh, it doesn't hit artifacts, I suppose, so not quite as good as one would like it to be. But yeah, just a lot more protection for Haymaker threats from Paul. And Spell Pierce being able to hit the One Ring is really nice too. Another Haywire Might. Just being able to play a fair game a lot better post board than the other versions of Nadu have been.
Yeah, it's going to be more grindy games. We're going to see if Nadu can use the One Ring and actually play it this time to outmaneuver Jeskai. And Vexing Bauble is interesting because of the amount of pitch spells we see with 4 subtleties in the main deck.
Yeah, 4 subtleties, a bunch of force of negations are definitely a reason to want to have pitch spells. We also saw that surgical extraction come in from Gabriel in the quarterfinals, so we know they'll probably bring that in, particularly against a version of this deck that fills up its graveyard more with Malevolent Rumble and leans on shifting woodlands a lot harder. And so against that sort of thing, surgical, again, not a card that Gabriel can cast playing colored mana. They don't have access to black mana in their deck. So yet another thing that gets turned off by Vexing Bauble, making it pretty good both to hardcast and as Nurse's Saga get in this matchup.
Yeah, so it's a real card with a lot of text, and it's very heads up to bring it in. And Paul's hand seems quite solid with the Vexing Bauble, a Nadu, and I believe a One Ring. And just presenting threats with cards that make the answers awkward.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, particularly. Yeah, Vexing Bauble in particular lining up so well against Force Negation and Subtlety means Gabriel doesn't get to play the same genre of game they wanted to play in the past, where you interact a little bit early and then play out a One Ring with free spells to back it up, so you're safe and not dying on that turn, and making sure that, on the One Ring turn, Gabriel will actually have to go shields down, means Paul kind of gets to change the texture of the game with Vexing Bauble that way.
Yeah, and Gabriel has 2 Wrath of the Skies in their hand, which means that they are fine letting the Vexing Bauble resolve. They think they're going to be able to clean up after it. But, especially with the dress down. But this Nadu still might be too much of a problem.
Yeah, notably, not any actual answer for a Nadu next turn, right? There's the dress down, I suppose, buys a turn, so that's something. But yeah, at that point, we're looking at dress down buying a turn, untap Wrath of the Skies that doesn't kill Nadu, and that's just going to be left sticking around afterwards into a bunch of open mana. And that's really, really not what Gabriel wants to be. Question in ball spot, I think, is whether he wants to go for it into this 2 open mana.
I mean, I don't know what the alternative is. Like, if you're not willing to go for it when your opponent's not doing anything and it's just holding open mana, what's the alternative? Oh, he doesn't have a third land. It's just Safekeeper
Yeah.
Swansong.
So I think in a spot like this, another thing Paul might end up doing is like even if he draws the land, well, given his hand at this point, not much else. But should he draw another threat off the top that he'd rather cast and preserve that Nadu for when Gabriel shields down? I could see that being a line he takes, but yeah, pretty awkward into double Wrath of the Skies to do anything other than Nadu here. Should he draw land?
One thing that's really nice from Paul's seat is that if he gets the untapped land on top, this is a really strong window for Gabriel to cast the Wrath of the Skies, and there's a good chance that they'll go for it even into the Swansong, which will give Paul a window when Gabriel is tapped out and unable to force things to Vexing Bauble. And they don't take it. Very disciplined.
Yeah, I have to imagine it's that Gabriel's taking the information that Paul missed his land drop into account, where the fact that Paul missed his land drop makes it much more likely he's going to crack Vexing Bauble this turn to be able to play something. And if Vexing Bauble is getting cracked, then at that point you want to hold on to hold on to the Wrath of the Skies, let the Vexing Bauble get cracked, and then next turn be able to Wrath with Force of Negation back up once the Vexing Bauble has been popped by Paul Green.
And Paul's just going on taking his turn. Does he hit the land drop?
Yeah, even with a hit land drop, it's getting to a point where it's going to be pretty awkward if he doesn't just jam Nadu.
And Dried Arbor is the land drop that makes it so you don't jam Nadu.
Yeah, I think we might have seen Gabriel miss a land drop. No, Gabriel hasn't missed a land drop yet, but does need to keep hitting land drops if they want to get to a point where this Wrath of the Skies in hand can also clean up a Nadu.
Yeah, and I'm curious what they're targeting. Is it the Arbor or the Safekeeper? I think it's the Arbor.
Yeah, so it's strictly better to target the Arbor in a spot like this because it can always be sacrificed to protect the Safekeeper, so I like that choice on Gabriel's spot. Yeah, with the Safekeeper in play, any removal spell is at best at best Paul will have the opportunity to trade a land for it, so it makes sense to get that trade out of the way and do it now to force Paul Green to be further constrained on mana, like we've seen him be for the last few turns.
And Gabriel is surveilling one. That's a very quick putting it on top. Let's see what it is.
I think in this spot for Gabriel, you can pretty safely assume that Paul Green has a Nadu in hand because he clearly doesn't have two drops in hand. He opted not to play anything out for the last few turns, and he kept his hand. He cracked his bauble, so he was trying towards something to play with more lands. And I think that means pretty safe read. Oh, my opponent has Nadu, and I should play accordingly.
Yeah, I really appreciate the caution being shown here and the respect, where they're just taking their time and just knowing that they're not under any pressure to do anything. They just need to breathe and not let Nadu have room to maneuver.
Yeah, and the more time they get, the more they get closer to being able to answer everything Paul Green has going on. We talked a little bit about how Gabriel's list has a specific combination of answers that are pretty narrow, with some on stack interaction, the Wrath of the Skies, and stuff like Rending Volley, where each thing answers one thing that Paul could have very specifically. And so in the early game, there's this window for the interaction to line up poorly. But as the game goes along and Gabriel gets to get a piece or two of every different genre of interaction, that gets less and less true. And there's just always going to be enough answers in Gabriel's hand for whatever Paul is doing.
And I believe Paul is just passing the turn back. And Gabriel's just running out of dress down, drawing a card. Are they going to try and scam a Flage into play? Don't think they have a follow-up land.
Possibly. I think at least leaving the window open for that. In Paul's spot, I believe he's just playing it safe, respecting a counterspell since Gabriel has left all their mana up every turn. But as for Gabriel, I think trying to hit a land in that spot is really important. Making sure you get to 4 mana so your Wrath can kill a Nadu.
And fortificationing this court is very interesting. What do you think Paul is courting for?
I think Paul just got him for 1 drop to develop his mana and develop his board, make Nadu that much stronger, give him that many more triggers. But this is really, really good for Paul, in that he gets to 2-for-1 Gabriel, kind of force them out of answers, and leave them a spot where he's drawing Nadu again next turn. We know there's not much going on for Gabriel, and this leaves them in a pretty difficult spot, I think, unless they draw something that lets them deal with Nadu.
I mean, Pending lets them deal with Shuko at the very least. But they're still in a bit of a tight spot.
Yeah,
and we'll see if that draws the Swan Song out of Paul.
Yeah, the Lorien revealed in hand for Gabriel is kind of nice. So what it lets them do is get to a point where Wrath of the Skies wipes Nadu, and if Paul goes for something like Swan Song here, then Gabriel can just fetch a Hallowed Fountain, Wrath of the Skies, and clear the Shuko to make sure that Nadu's not doing very much where it comes down.
Yeah, and it looks like that's absolutely what they do. Just clearing the board, making sure the Nadu that comes down won't have any support. And Paul's stuck with a court in hand that'll eventually get an Outrider, but isn't doing much at the moment.
Nadu would be something. I believe we know there's a second Wrath of the Skies in Gabriel's hand that's going to deal with this Nadu if necessary, if there isn't a better answer drawn. Which honestly at this point there might just not be. It might just be 4 mana destroy non-target Nadu, since it doesn't target and doesn't give a Nadu trigger. But both players kind of top decking, so I wouldn't call a counterpall out of this by a long stretch.
Notably, Paul has those Shifting Woodlands in play, has Delirium, and has one of each Shuko and Nadu in the graveyard. So if he's given time, he will eventually just need to find one combo piece to go off.
It's better than that even, right? Because he has a card in hand. So he doesn't even need to find one combo piece. He just needs Gabriel to not find anything, and in 2 turns he'll probably win.
Yeah.
Assuming he draws a land or a combo piece of some sort, I suppose.
And let's see what Paul surveils. Keeping on top. Pretty quick decision on that one. And it's a 1 ring! That absolutely
is brutal.
huge.
Yeah, now Gabriel's kind of being squeezed on like 2 or 3 different axes, where there's the combo being threatened. This 1 ring's going to take over the game, and if the 1 ring does get answered, well, Shifting Woodlands can copy the 1 ring and take over the game.
And Paul's list, very late on ways to actually answer the 1 ring, means this is a serious problem.
Yeah, this is Paul firmly in the driver's seat here, where it's really hard for Gabriel's deck to come back from when behind on these axes with no cards in hand. It's quite reasonable that they top deck an answer to one of these problems, but top decking an answer to all of these problems seems really difficult. The way they'd normally do something like that would start with the 1 ring, but there's not enough mana here for them to go 1 ring into answer for Paul's 1 ring, and that means that, yeah, the game looks pretty locked up. the second card draw off the One Ring means Paul's almost certainly going to get there in a turn or two.
Yeah, and he's drawn a Shuko, so if he wants to, he can just turn Woodlands into an Nadu and play Shuko and try to start going off. He can also just develop normally.
Yeah. Either way, looks pretty over for Gabriel. It's just a matter of how Paul actually chooses to close it out in the next few turns. But yeah, regardless of what Gabriel has, there's just an abundance of card advantage for Paul Green that I don't think is really possible for the Jeskai deck to keep up with.
Yeah, I believe Gabriel's card in hand is the third Wrath of the Skies. So if Paul commits to the board in a way that is vulnerable to that, maybe Gabriel can claw their way back in with a Flage or something. But Sun Cleanser in hand means that's very unlikely.
This is Sun Cleanser in hand, and there's still the One Ring in play, which means that even if the board gets wiped, Paul can just draw a bunch more cards and go again in a turn or two.
Yeah, and is Springtime Nantuko being bestowed or casted? It's being casted.
I believe there's enough mana here to card for Nadu, but not enough mana to card for Nadu and also Shuko.
I believe so as well. There's going to be 4 creatures and 2 lands, which means it's exactly enough to card for Nadu.
Yeah. Paul playing it really safe here is making sure there isn't either a board wipe or a galvanic discharge to take care of anything, and then knowing that he can really safely go for it next turn.
Yeah, the Sun Cleanser was unnecessary if you're only focused on winning this turn, but you don't have to just win this turn, and that's very just aware. It feels Paul is doing a good job being aware of the state of the game and knowing exactly how much time he has.
Yeah, in a spot like this, I wonder if Paul even just wants to go for Nadu, get a trigger off that Flage, because once Flage is down, it means there isn't answer for Sun Cleanser plus board wipe, so it's pretty much safe going here. At worst, there's a counter spell for the card, and that seems extremely beatable when it means this Flage is only getting cast once this turn and not really dealing with anything Paul has going on to allow for a Shuko plus Shifting Woodlands win next turn. So yeah, I believe in this spot, Paul deterministically has lethal no matter what Gabriel's last card in hand is.
And I think Paul is wondering whether to cord for Nadu in response to Flage being cast or entering. Because if you cord in response to it being cast. Oh, he's getting a Safekeeper! Oh, he's playing so careful.
Yeah, Safekeeper just like one of a trillion options in this spot that will guaranteed keep Paul safe. It means the Flage is not going to be killing anything. 1-for-1 interaction doesn't work against Paul because of what he's got going on. And if that's Gabriel's last card, and Board Wipe also doesn't work because it's Sun Cleanser. So yeah, there's no last card Gabriel could have that would prevent Paul from winning here, and I have to believe that's game next turn with Shifting Woodlands copying Nadu.
Yeah, and just leaning into that copy ability of the Woodlands is just very heads up. And Wrath for 0, very reasonable, just getting rid of the 2 insects. But
yeah, with the Safekeeper in play, the Wrath is never going for more than 0. It's the Sunland is going to be protected from spot removal forever, so might as well do it for 0. But yeah, the writing's extremely on the wall.
Yeah, and Paul's just playing up the Shuko, gonna copy the Nadu, and that's gonna be game.
Yeah, Nadu combo notably not deterministic, so Gabriel likely will make Paul go through the loop at least once. But yes, I have a hard time imagining he fizzles given the Spring Hot Nantuko in play.
Yeah, and just there being 4 starting creatures, and Gabriel scoops it up as soon as the first land is hit.
Yeah, I think Gabriel's out there is that just specifically the top 6 cards of Paul's deck are all non-lands somehow.
Well, it'd have to be 8 since the Shifting Woodlands is a creature too.
That's true. Yeah, once you get to the point where there's a single hit, it's pretty over.
And now we're going to game 3. Gabriel's probably hoping that they can get some actual card advantage and hit their land drops this game, instead of being forced into a corner.
This is a pretty good example of the strength of this version of Nadu post-board, where the Woodlands gives you more resiliency, so you can present the combo over and over. And yeah, with diverse threats like the One Ring, you get to put the squeeze on control decks that's really strong.
Yeah, and we're starting looking at opening hands. Gabriel's got Wrath of the Skies and multiple lands. That's probably just a keep. And Paul's got interesting, he's looking at bottoming a Springheart Nanchuko. You don't really see that much.
Yeah, makes some sense given the way his deck is structured to be able to play a longer game rather than leaning on that early pressure from Nantuko and nickel and diming your opponent. Yeah, with things like the One Ring and more copies of Shifting Woodlands, his deck's very much more about playing a long game, and at that point, the Nantuko, given that he doesn't have anything else to play on two, if he plays that on two, could be a bit of a liability against one-for-one interaction. So makes sense to bottom it and make sure he kind of hits his land, doesn't stumble the way he did last game.
And he's very consistent about that, bidding the second copy. So Gabriel shocks in Steam Fence, holding up Counterspell. And do they have a third land? I believe there's an Arid Mesa in there.
Yeah, and this hand is kind of perfect for Gabriel in terms of game plan. It's very scripted. You counter everything that matters. You don't you let all the little stuff that doesn't matter go, and then you wipe the board, and your opponent has to start over. So yeah, they're very much looking to get like a 2-for-1 with each of their board wipes, maybe, and counter the things that are really important.
So there is no third land, but there's 2 Wraths, a Counterspell, and a Force of Negation.
Yeah, I believe we might even be at
3
3
Wraths.
rats at this point.
And is that a Prismatic Ending as the last card?
Yeah, without lands, this hand is going to play out really clunkily for Gabriel. I think they have maybe another turn in which to try and find a third land, to bridge towards that Wrath of the Skies. But yeah, then a spot where they need to find lands, and then after that they need to find card advantage. So things are looking pretty difficult.
Yeah, and at least the Thundering Falls is one of the better lands you can draw.
Yeah, it's a land that finds other lands, which is quite nice for Gabriel. I think we might have seen an Endurance in Paul's hand. I'd expected to see, Hard Cast at the end of turn to start applying some pressure. And if put Gabriel in a squeeze where they have something they need to interact with, but are also missing lands, and so can't do that plus other things.
Yeah, it's a lot more effective to be pressuring your opponent and playing threats while your opponent's missing land drops as opposed to just playing threats. Because if they have the ability to just trade with your threats as you cast them, then you're not able to actually get that advantage. And Gabriel's thinking about whether to counter this Endurance. Because they know that if it resolves, then Paul's just going to be able to get consistent advantage, and they don't let it go.
Yeah, and this is the sort of spot Paul kind of wants to set himself up for over the long game. He really wants to be setting himself up to force Gabriel to interact with threats that don't matter very much, keep hitting land drops, and at some point resolve something like the One Ring to take over the game.
Yeah, and this Malevolent Rumble is just going to dig him to what he needs. And this card selection is just very powerful in situations where your opponent's low on resources. He takes the Endurance. Just getting another flesh threat.
Force of Negation, a pretty awkward one for Gabriel here. It would mean giving up their one other counter spell, but at the same time, there's like a really limited number of targets it even has in Paul's deck. So you got to make sure to leverage your points where you can.
and shocks in the Temple Garden. Is he? I assume this means he's going to Cord for 3. One interesting thing, you can double dip for Cord with Wallet Roots, but you can't actually do it with the Eldrazi Scion.
Yeah. God here, really nice. Again, gets to like force a counterspell at end of turn, which is what you really want to do. And yeah, leaves Ball with all his mana. I believe there's another Endurance we saw on hand. Yeah, so it makes sense
Yep.
to see that played. Kind of again, but Gabriel in exactly the same sort of squeeze where he's applying pressure with this Endurance at end of turn. But if Gabriel taps out for it, then there's room for Paul to resolve something. Unlike last turn, I believe this Counterspell and Force of Negation are the only blue cards in Gabriel's hand. So if this Endurance gets countered, it would mean that there is no. It would mean that there'd be no interaction for something like a ring out of Paul. So I like the chance to let the Endurance resolve this turn, while Gabriel didn't let that happen last turn.
Yeah, and there's exactly a Cord in Paul's hand, but that's still much more important to not let resolve than the Endurance. And targeting himself to make sure that there's an Endurance still left in the deck. Very mindful for the future of like actually being able to combo with the deck.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense here. A lot of strong cards over for a long game were in his graveyard, so putting those back into his deck is nice. Stuff like Nantuko is getting closer and closer to the point where it threatens taking over the game if cast. It could be bestowed on something like Endurance, so you want to get those things back into your deck, kind of set up for a longer game. And at the moment, uh, Gabriel is pretty far off of like playing plus activating Flage, so not really worried about your opponent's graveyard as much.
Yeah, and Gabriel's just choosing to keep passing. I believe the plan is to just hold up counter magic and then eventually stabilize with the Wrath of the Skies. Paul's just trying to dig to some more relevant cards. He knows that the Cord in hand that he has is just not enough.
Yeah, it's at this point pretty clear Gabriel has at least one piece of counter magic, so being able to pressure that, having a threat having multiple threats, one for end of turn with the card, and then one you can untap with, definitely what Paul wants to be doing in this spot and kind of setting up for that.
And just be able to use the threat of activation to force Gabriel to hold up mana while the Endurance gets in and gets Gabriel down to a life total where the life total really matters is important. And I think the Shuko will demand a Force of Negation from Gabriel.
Yeah, I don't think they have quite enough blue cards in hand to do that and also hold up counter spells. Yeah, the problem is something like a One Ring or a Nadu here just threatens to generate so much card advantage that Gabriel's kind of forced into letting it resolve. The nice thing here for Gabriel is that if the Shuko resolves, we might see something like land plus Wrath of the Skies next turn to wipe the board, and that's kind of the way I can see them getting back into this. Beyond that, it's a pretty tough spot. The problem is, given this card we know is in Paul's hand, even Wrath of the Skies isn't a clean answer, where it can just be met with a Sun Cleanser from Paul in response to make sure that the board doesn't get wiped, and then that's just so much pressure on Gabriel over the next 2 turns.
Yeah, where it's. I mean, there is a Supreme Verdict in hand from Gabriel, so they have a way to Wrath that avoids that, but it's still not the best spot to be in.
The problem with Supreme Verdict is Paul just lets that resolve and afterwards cards for Nadu and gets to untap with Shuko plus Nadu. So it's really important that the board wipe from Gabriel in a spot like this also clears the Shuko. But at the same time, doing that really hard. Basically, God from Paul is like kind of applying an implicit squeeze on Gabriel, where there's no answer that can beat all the options Paul could get off of God, and so Gabriel kind of forced into a tough spot as a result of that.
Right, it's just, and Gabriel is playing out the verdict, just saying that if you have the Nadu, you have the Nadu. If you have the Cord for Nadu, you have the Cord for Nadu.
Yeah, and not even something like Force of Negation isn't out here for the card because Force can only be pitch cast on your opponent's turn, not your own. So that means that card is just going to resolve here.
And now Paul's going to Cord for Nadu and probably fetch out a Dryad Arbor as well, to just have 2 creatures in play. Oh, and the pending for the Shuko!
Right, it's the land off the top does give Gabriel the ability to interact with both interact with the Shuko and Paul's board, but at the same time, untapping with Nadu still just really strong for Paul. I believe they can still fetch a Surveil off of that. Misty, I don't know how many Surveils they have left in deck. Maybe that's not possible. But yeah, a lot of draws that get pretty close to ending it here.
Paul has all 3 of his Surveils in play, but that's a board which can get the Outrider on core. And is there a card to pitch to force? There isn't.
Right, yeah. I believe Counterspell was already spent, so nothing for force left. And yeah, I mean, that's at least 4 triggers, 6 if there's a Dryad Arbor fetched. And it's hard to imagine Gabriel winning this, even if Paul doesn't actually kill this turn, because Outright Encore, unlike Shuko, can be activated at instant speed. We're pretty likely to see it happen again at the beginning of Gabriel's upkeep, and that means Paul just gets a kind of insurmountable amount of cards in hand for next turn.
Also, just being able to hold up Swan Song means that a single Wrath of the Skies just isn't enough to stop Paul from continuing to go off. So I think Paul's just very much won this game.
Yeah, I think Paul can pretty safely pass here rather than fetching for Dryad Arbor to go again, because yeah, like you said, he has Swan Song up. He has he has like another 6 cards to draw here, and so there's not much really Gabriel could have that would get around that.
Yeah, and Gabriel's mana is just taxed enough that they can only play 1 card this turn, and with no Supreme Verdict in hand, whatever when they Wrath is just going to get Swan Songed.
There's a face-up Swan Song in hand. I'm pretty sure there is a card to fetch here for Paul, and that means that means that this game looks pretty wrapped up. Paul's gonna untap with a Nantuko to bestow and a ton of mana, and yeah, I don't think it's possible. It's even possible for him to fizzle at this point.
Yeah, there's just so much material that even if you fizzle, you can just play a second Nadu, go again, cord for the third Nadu, go again.
Yeah, game very much over.
And Gabriel scoops it up, and Paul Green's going to be going to our finals.
Yep, testament to the strength of this build of Nadu at doing exactly this, at winning through being able to win through interaction, have resiliency, and play a longer game rather than the version without Malevolent Rumbles and only 1 copy of Woodlands that we saw earlier today.
Yeah, this build's just able to grind it out in these slow, grindy matchups and get enough incremental value that it doesn't matter that Jeskai has all the Wrath of the Skies. It's able to just fight at the level that Jeskai is.
Very much so. Excited to see how that pans out in the finals against the build of Jeskai. It's even more decked for Nadu with 4 main deck copies of Wrath of the Skies.
Alrighty. And we'll see you after this break.